Ben has worked with horses, mules, and donkeys all over the world, from Mustang and race horses in California, stock horses in Australia, and working equines in Cambodia and Ethiopia. Ben's use of the science of equine behaviour rather than a one-method approach has been successful with traumatized animals at the UK's leading equine charities, and his ability to work with human behaviour has been utilised by world-leading animal welfare organizations such as the WSPA, the Brooke, and the Donkey Sanctuary, where Ben is now working as lead behavior. Ben's delivery of training is unique, ensuring an outstanding training experience that is enjoyable and life-changing. I really hope that it's exactly what is going to happen tonight. So Ben, thank you so much for being here with us tonight. Up to you, Ben.
Okay, so I've been lucky enough to work with equines professionally for 20 years. And due to the nature of the type of work that obviously I do, we're working with the worst cases of behavior often. So safety is a major issue for me, not just in terms of working equids, but all equids. And of course, as Joelle mentioned, there's a lot of my work is about working with humans. And the element of combining human behavior and equine behavior to be able to create something that is safe is really important. There's so many risks taken, so many accidents every year, especially riding. There are there's been since the last 10 years about 2,500 riding accidents. There's about 8 people every year killed in the UK due to riding accidents. So safety is a massive thing. And sometimes we don't think enough about safety. So it's a real pleasure to be able just to talk this through and try and answer some questions. A lot of it, I hope, will be common sense and affirm what you're already doing. You've all got vast experience. I want to look at a little bit of a sort of a general approach, a little bit of some very specialist things that we need to train, and a particular area that generally doesn't work for most people because they don't do enough of this one thing. So we're going to try and check that as we go through. I'm very lucky to have started my career with working horses a long time ago. This is myself and my father and a Percheron gelding called Gallant. And I've just noticed that I must have been about 9-10 years old here, and I had until recently the same haircut due to lockdown and the lack of hairdressers. So not much has changed. Very lucky to spend a lot of time. My father thought he should have been a cowboy in the American West, and consequently we were working with heavy horses, as I say, 40 plus years ago, and ploughing and haymaking and doing all aspects on a small holding. And that really is my background. And then I came to behavior professionally 20 years ago, working with equine behavior and the science of behavior rather than a method. There are a lot of methods out there, but the science of behavior underpins all the methods, all the training that you will see: natural horsemanship, classical horsemanship, clicker training, whatever it might be. We're looking at the science of behavior. I wanted to just kind of start by looking at the basics. And the first thing I always say to people, you are safety. It doesn't matter what training you put into your animal. It doesn't matter how much you do with your animal. If you yourself don't act, behave, and understand safety, you're going to have an accident. It's absolutely down to that individual, whoever you are working with equines, to work in a safe way. And that's about a knowledge that you have. It's about an understanding of behavior. It's just not pushing your animal too much too quickly or too young. All of those things come from who we are as a person. And that's where the majority of accidents, I think, happen, is we take risks, we push a little bit too much, we ask when we shouldn't, we don't walk away early. So safety really comes from who we are, our attitudes to the work that we're doing, and the risks that we are prepared to take. If we've got safety in mind and we're fit enough ourselves to work with our working equids, and I think fitness is really important, because obviously the less fit you are, the harder it is to keep up, the more mistakes you're likely to make. So fitness, especially in riders, I find, and I know some of you mentioned that maybe you were doing riding, earlier, is that if you ride, then that being fit enough is really important. I will say that equids have a mind of their own and can never be considered completely safe for that reason. No matter how well trained an equine is, something can happen that you cannot prepare it for. Heaven forbid that happens, and we'll do everything we can to prepare our animal. But it is something to be aware of, and that leads to this complacency creates injuries. I think we get complacent. What I see in a lot of the equine world is the more we do, the longer we're with our animal, the more risks we take, the more we push, the more complacent we become, and that's when accidents happen. So again, this comes back to this idea about we are the safety that we generally see. And the final element of that safety is the horse, donkey, or mule has to physically grow mentally into the job. And we can't rush that development of the animal. We can't rush that physical ability to do the job. And I think most of you will already know that. I think that traditionally that's what has happened. Animals have grown into their role. I think the danger nowadays with equine safety, working equids, is that often people who maybe don't have that innate experience and knowledge will leap in and do too much too quickly and make some fundamental errors. And I know we had a lovely webinar discussion group just a few weeks ago, and there were questions: what slope should you work on? How old should your animal be? And the brilliant answers were, well, that depends on the individual. It depends on how much the animal is capable of. You've got to make that assessment. And that is so key to safety. It doesn't matter what we do about training, all about being able to do these things first. Now, what does make a safe working equid? Well, it's all about training. After we've taken off that first bit of who we are, and we need to decide what behaviors make our equine safe. So it's always slightly different depending on what method, what risk you're prepared to take. But the key is to train in a way that promotes or produces the behaviors and the characteristics you particularly want. Often what happens is people have a training method, they have a way of doing things, and what they haven't done is start with the end in mind. I strongly think with your work in equids, you need to sort of jump forward. What do you want that animal to be able to do? How do you want him to do it? How do you want her to behave? And then work out how your training should be applied to produce that. Some people want to have a partnership. Some people are quite happy to direct and tell their animal what to do. Certain methods or trainers will advocate more control or punishment. And those all produce different relationships. They produce a different outcome to the training that you do. So it's important to do something I call start with the end in mind. If you're going to have an equid that is doing a good job of training and working, essentially what you have to do is to make sure you've chosen a way of working that will produce that. Often people start with the method and what we're doing and then see where they end up. I'd strongly recommend you worked in reverse for equine training. Now, as most of you I'm sure are aware, but for those who are not, traditionally animals were bred for the job. They were selected for the work that they had to do. They generally experienced with the mare. They grew up doing work alongside the mare. I say work, but walking the mare, may have to go back to work before the foal was weaned, and they were getting experience alongside their mare. And I would strongly recommend that if you have that opportunity in that situation, because there's a huge amount of learning that goes on. And experienced handlers. I think once upon a time, training was done by very experienced handlers who had huge amounts of knowledge and probably had it passed down to them over generations. Now there's a tendency for people to come to working with equids, certainly in maybe Europe, Australia, parts of North America, and they're jumping from almost no experience to trying to do something. And again, that brings an element of risk and danger. So trying to get that experience before we accelerate into that level is really important. It's more of my childhood here. I thought I'd share that with you. Nice Persian mare called Sweetie. And actually, I think this was Gallant, and he was a foal. So I wanted to talk about temperament a little bit as an element of safety. And that, one second, I'm conscious that the sun in the UK is suddenly shining more than it should do. That there's kind of the temperament element that we have to bring to safety. You know, is an animal just young and still needs education? That's different than if you've got an animal that's nervous, impatient, or impulsive by character. Each animal has its own learning style, its own character in the way that it behaves. And thinking about the suitability of that character or temperament to the job is really important. It's been shown that if you have a mare that is naturally, has a foal that is nervous, and you do work with them as a foal, you can move that animal's confidence levels along the scale. It will never be as confident as a character, a foal that's born that is confident and has work done with it. However, that nervous animal that's worked with as a foal may end up more confident than a confident foal that isn't worked with. So we can take that character, and as long as we're working with the foal, we can move it towards where we want it to be for its behavior. And it's so important that we work with foals, fully work with foals. I'm not just talking about, oh, we just pick up their feet and do a bit of handling. You know, we should be doing everything that they need to do in the first few months of their life to prepare them for forever. What they learn right at the start, they'll keep with them forever. So whether that's fitting singles and harness and things around them, getting used to that sort of aspect. I'm not suggesting that we go out and lunge them or actually get them working, but preparing them for having things on them, around them, noises and sound and standing still and being bored. All of these things, proper training as if it was a grown horse. We really need to get better in the equine world at training horses, donkeys, and mules when they're foals. Now, if you've got mules, then you know that's a given. You really want to train them from day one. But the rest of the horse and donkey world is a little bit behind on this, and I think it's so important for safety. Train foals, train them young, and train them lots. We're only talking, you know, maybe 2, 3, 10-minute sessions a day. The other 23.5 hours a day, they can go and be a horse. But they are a domesticated horse, and it's so important that they have that opportunity to learn really young. The other aspect after temperament is to think about putting in some problem solving. We want to think about how we actually do our training that encourages the animal to solve problems for themselves. Often modern training methods, and particularly certain aspects of natural horsemanship or things like that, can be very directional. Do it until I stop telling you to do it, and keep doing it unless I change my mind. And that can have some appeal, and there's some elements of that that could be very effective. However, we also want an animal that thinks, that learns how to solve problems. Now, naturally, they solve problems by running away from stuff and being scared or moving out of sight, jumping sideways. Now, those aren't things we want them to solve. What we want them to be able to do is to solve problems in a way that's better for domestication. And that is things like standing still. Deliberately training an equine to stand still to solve a problem. So this is classically like veterinary care. Most people don't train their animal to stand still and offer standing still as a way of solving problems. The thing that you want most of all for your animal, you want them to stand still for the vet, stand still for the dentist, stand still for the farrier, stand still when they encounter something, they get things wrapped around their legs, or there's something really scary that they need to deal with. That's not a natural behavior. We have to put that in with training. Most people gain that by just working with their animals and doing things. My experience is it's much better if you deliberately set out to train that problem solving deliberately, so that the animal can offer that to you. Again, just to give you a sort of clear example, is in veterinary care, often the vet will be trying to creep towards a wound or a leg they've got to examine or something like that. And people will be telling the donkey, horse, well done, good boy, maybe even giving food rewards for things. They're not specifically marking anything. They're just marking the proximity of the vet to the wound. And it's not something that the animal can really grasp. What we should be marking is standing still. If you're standing still, that's the behavior that solves problems for veterinary care. And so it's the same with any element of safety. What you want to teach your animal to do is, when there's a problem, offer standing still as a way of solving that problem. That will then generally give you enough time to react, to offer directions, to move, to get out of the way, whatever you need to do to stay safe. But I would deliberately add that in as a method of training. Obviously, there's a lot of talk about trust, and I kind of found this picture from World War II. I'm not sure how much trust anybody had in the mule here, or the mule in the people. Maybe some resignation to the situation, perhaps. But trust is talked about a lot, and the more you work with an animal, the more trust you have, and he's got to trust you, and you've got to trust him. That's a key element. But what is trust? Trust is, in fact, let's ask you in the chat box, tell me what you think trust is. Just type it in there. Let's have a look at what you think trust is, or how we would define it with our equines. I'd be really appreciative if you could throw some comments in there just to see what we've got. Caroline, yeah, when my horse feels safe around me. Good, yeah, I like that. Anybody else got any comments on what is trust? It's an interesting question, because lots of talk about trust in the equine world. Carol's got the horse's confidence in the handler. Maybe, yeah, yeah. Confidence that there will be no harm. Yeah, maybe. Good communication between horse and handler. When things happen without thinking. I'm interested in that, Joel. Without thinking. Connection. See, these are all really positive things. They're really good. Feeling safe around somebody. But, like, could I trust you? Could trust be a negative thing? Could I trust you always to let me down? Could I trust you always to be late? Could I trust somebody to be rude? Or could I, is that a sense of how we could also use trust? Is there a negative element? Because we tend to focus on trust being very positive. Understand the limits of signs of discomfort. When your animal follows you even when the situation seems dangerous. David, I'm not sure if that's trust or craziness, but it's interesting to me. You've all got really positive ideas about trust. So for me, trust is simply the ability to predict the behavior of another animal or person. The ability to predict the behavior of another animal or person. So if I can, there's an element in all of that of what you've said, but it's simply that ability to be able to predict that behavior. Then I can trust you. And that's what we do with people. How they behave, good or bad, we predict their behavior, and then we can either trust them or not. So does that make sense to people? It's a bigger element than just a positive communication. You know, I meet a lot of people with equine behavior problems, and they trust their horse is going to buck or rear or throw themselves on the ground, because they can predict that behavior because it's happened so many times before. So trust is about predicting behavior, but how do we get it? To get trust, we have to work in a consistent way. Consistency is key. If I'm going to be predictable, then I have to be consistent. Tamara mentioned being consistent, which is great. You have to be consistent. And you have to do the work. You can't get trust. You can't get the animal to predict your behavior if you don't experience the things together that you want them to experience. You might have a horse that you groom and you spend all the time in the field and you do some groundwork in the field, and then we say, okay, we're going to go for a ride. Can you truly trust or predict that behavior if you haven't done enough work to know what they're going to be like in a different environment or in a different with you on their back, for instance? Many horses are really happy to follow people on the ground, but the minute you go riding and you sit behind them and they're meeting the problem first, they can't predict what's going to happen, and their behavior changes. So we have to behave consistently. We have to have a plan where we do things together so that they can predict our behavior, we can predict theirs. How do we keep trust? By ensuring that we stay consistent. When we make mistakes in the terms of asking too much, doing things that we wouldn't normally do, just pushing it further than we should, those are all things that will make a withdrawal of trust from the trust bank. So developing a deliberate attitude, and this comes back to what sort of training do you want to do to get the end result, is very much about having a predictable way of working in which the animal can predict your behavior and you can predict the animal's behavior. And there are some ways we can get that. There's some general behavior that we can train. So in general, really good, leading skills, and most people's leading skills tend to be a little bit ropey, to be honest. We think we can lead because the horse kind of follows us. But being really light on that lead, not having to put pressure, the animal shouldn't need that head collar. It should be just with you and stopping and starting as you go. We're paying attention to the animal. Feet moving over, control of the head. There are about 11 different exercises of domestication, which if they aren't done thoroughly in the horse will lead to problems later on. Backing up, space preservation, all of these fundamental training things that are important. We then have to shape behavior, and I'm sure this is a term that you're all familiar with, successive approximation. It's building up behaviors that you want from tiny blocks that you add together. These flags that you can see in this top picture didn't start that wide. They started about 20 meters apart. In fact, they started with just one line of flags and then gradually got to 2 lines and 20 meters, 15 meters, 10 meters, 5 meters, 2 meters apart until you can see the behavior here. Shaping behavior in any training, whether that's horses for riding, whether it's working equids, is really important. Sometimes it happens naturally, and I'll touch on that in a moment. But other times it has to be a deliberate plan for us to work. So if you're going to work with your equine, then trying to assimilate the things that that animal is going to need to be able to do. And that includes expanding the animal's comfort zones. So the comfort zones are the edge of where an animal is comfortable with what's happening to it or around it. So you all know that moment where they go, oh, I'm not sure. That's the edge of the comfort zone. If you keep going, they're going to go past that comfort zone. They're going to be over their threshold. They're going to have to reach for leaving or for being terrified, running away, whatever they're going to do to solve the problem. What we need to do is work to the edge of the animal's comfort zone. We do need to stretch them a little bit. This horse in the bottom left or the bottom right here was really worried about flags when we started out the session. And it took about half an hour without force or pressure to just gradually shape their behavior until he could start to relax. He's not totally comfortable. There's still a little bit of work to be done there. In comparison, this young foal's comfort zones are considerably bigger. He's already been exposed to lots of things, and he thinks, yeah, walking under a bit of a flag is no problem. For another animal, walking under flags that are 10 meters above their head is a big issue. Each one has an individual character, and it's important that your training fits that character. Oh, sorry. So when we're thinking about our training, we're thinking about what is an animal going to have to do? What are they going to have to carry? What are the elements of the things? It's not just about fitting the tack. It's about considering the shaping process of training for noise, for movement, for the potential something to drop off and fall down, something that might rattle. All of those elements need to be incorporated into training. And often that doesn't happen. The mistake people make is we as adult humans generalize very easily. And that can cause problems because we forget that to our equids, who are very much survival specialists, that they take each individual element of their environment and watch it and assess it. And so that's why, you know, you can walk past something on the way out. When you turn round and you're walking back, that animal's like, oh, what are you doing? I haven't seen that before. Because the shadows have changed, because the lights change, that's a new object. And that is the level of training that we need to go to. It's not just about pulling the cart. It's about the noise of things. It's about the weight of things. It's about all the elements of whatever you want them to do. And this is where the second part of our training comes in. And this is the part that's often missed out by people. Generalization. And as I mentioned, adult humans are really good at it. So the example I would use is when you're a child, perhaps your parents show you a picture in a book and it's a red duck and they say this is a duck, and you kind of look at it and there's a vague recollection that that red thing in the book is a duck. And then there's another book and they show you that book and they said this duck but it's blue. So you're like, but I thought you said ducks were red. No, they're red and blue. Oh, okay. And then you get in the bath and there's a yellow duck and it floats. That's a different type of duck. Okay, right. Those ducks come in 3 types. And as you grow, you begin to know that ducks have a lot of characteristics around a bill and a little curly tail and webbed feet, and they go quack and they like water. And pretty much anywhere you go in the world, if you find something that matches that criteria, you'll go, it's a duck. Your parents will probably go, no, darling, that's a goose, because they forgot to mention neck length. But it's the point I'm trying to get to here. As an adult human, we generalize very easily. We think a lorry is the same as a trailer. We think the forest is the same at different times of the day, because we generalize so easily. Equines don't, because generalization to them would be very dangerous. So to generalize them, we have to do lots of work. We think about the animal, the environment the animal will work in, and then we replicate it in sight, in sound, in shade, in color, in noise, in movement. There are so many things that we need to bring into our training. You know, ground workers, you know, we'll go over a tarpaulin, or we'll go past an umbrella, all those sorts of things, or we'll drill our horse round and round. But what we need to do is think about all that means to the equine is that's just in that environment. So people often get in touch, Ben, I've been doing some work, my horse is nervous on the ground, he spooks when I'm out riding, and I've been doing some work with some obstacles, some plastic over the arena, or you know, whatever, but it's not really helping. And I was like, well, it won't unless you meet that plastic in the arena, because that's the only thing you're training him to deal with. What we need to do is have a generalization plan where he meets these obstacles in different environments. For them, bunting in one environment is just bunting in that environment. When they meet it in another environment, they're like, oh, what's that? When they meet it in another environment, they're like, oh, I kind of recognize that. And the third and the fourth, and by the time they get to 5th or 6th exposure, just like us, they start to go, okay, so that's what bunting is and that's what it does. But we need to put that in deliberately, that process of generalization. It's the same if you're a farrier or a vet, or what often happens and goes wrong is people don't prepare their animal to that level. They might be able to pick up the feet, but they don't pick up the feet like the farrier would. They don't put the feet up for the length of time that the farrier would. They don't hold them in the same way that the farrier would. They don't smell like a farrier. They don't do the training where the farrier would stand. They don't do it when it's raining or when it's getting dark or when they're in a rush. And all of those are elements of safety that we need to bring in. So this is easier to control. If we deliberately do it as training and set up a shaping plan for generalization for our work in Equid, it's easier to control because we can control it. So therefore, naturally, it's safer. How much we expose them to, how many things we expose them to at one time. It's not just one thing at a time. We get to do 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 things at a time. But it's quite hard to fit in because you're going to have a training program. You're going to have to do it. You're going to have to think about it. What often happens, you know, these are all the elements that we might be thinking about in our work in Equid. Sudden noises, sudden movement, working in and out shadows, obstacles on the floor, stepping over things, the noise of machinery, crowds of people, if you're involved in this. Traffic, bicycles. This is a classic example. I looked at this picture, I'm like, fantastic. But you can imagine if a bicycle came down this road now or down the path, those animals probably wouldn't even know it was there until it, you know, reached their rump at the earliest because of those blinkers. And all of a sudden, there's this thing whizzing past them. It's a sudden spook. We have to put those things in, and we have to put them in narrow spaces. It's not good enough just to ride in a nice big circle around our animals with your bicycle or have your kids do it. It's having them whiz past behind you. So all of these are elements for our work in Equids that we need to think about. As I say, we could put that in as a training plan, deliberately work on those things. Use balloons. You know, balloons are a great way of introducing this. You blow them up a little bit. We shape the behavior. So start small, gradually blow them up, get closer to the animal, let them go so they whiz around. It's not so some crazy balloon carrying clown jumps out, your horse is going to be fine. It's so that sudden movement, noise, all of those things are something that the animal can deal with. Or for our generalization, you might just do it on the job. Now, what I mean is with experience, you'll naturally be exposing your animal to progressively more and more challenging situations. You'll be progressively doing more with them as they age, as they get experience, and you can incorporate this generalization into just working with your Equid. However, it is much harder to control. It is easier to fit in because you can just be doing things and it will come with your animal's behavior and your work. The danger is you can't control the size or how fast some of those things will come. And you have to be very good as a trainer to recognize that you are doing work at the same time as exposing your animal to things and doing training. It's absolutely fine to do it this way, but you need to have the skills to do it and the ability to control the environment and make sure that you're not overreaching that animal, because if they have a bad experience, then it's really difficult to get it over. There are some specific areas that I think work in Equids need more training in. Patience and standing still. Now, don't confuse the two. They're not the same thing. As I said, standing still is for solving problems. It's for dealing with situations that require you to offer a behavior other than moving, running away, spooking, all those sorts of things. Patience is the ability to just calmly accept the passage of time. And this can be taught. It can be taught through deliberately having a shaping plan that sets out to just stand there doing boredom training. You know, start with 10 seconds. If your animal stands still and is calm and relaxed, it gets a scratch or a food reward if you want to. And from 10 seconds, we build up to 15, 20, 30, 50. a minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, and away we go. Once you get to a certain level, the animal just goes, okay, I'll just wait. Now that can happen on the job. You know, young animals with their horse mothers, their donkey mares, or just through experience of being a young animal. I would suggest it's much better to train it as a foal, to deliberately put that behaviour in. And there's again the advantage of having foals working with their mares. But deliberately having a program for training patients, because you don't want those animals going anywhere while you're hitching up or while you're doing something with machinery. You need to know that they're not going anywhere until you ask them to do that. And so deliberately working on it. You know, it's a strange concept, but I often say to riders, you know, have you practiced your patience? Have you stood out in the arena, just sat there doing nothing? Because sometimes that's what's needed, you know, whether you're talking to somebody or just waiting at a junction or whatever it might be. In other cases, standing still is what you're looking for. So these are specific areas that I would encourage people to work with. It's quite common working equids, you know, to kind of develop a little bit of a thinking equid. One that actually knows what it's doing, how it's working, what it's going to do. And there are endless examples of that, especially during World War II and World War I, thinking about it from animals that were working within the military and how they learnt their routines and what they needed to do, and they would almost do them unaided, including things like delivering ammunitions or collecting wounded soldiers. So it deliberately setting out to create a thinking equid. And this is a contradiction for some people, because obviously we want our equines to think, but we only want them to think so much. We don't want them completely to make up their own minds, but otherwise they might decide not to do what we want them to do. But at the same time, we need them to be able to think, solve problems, and work in a way that is safe and predictable. And it's a fine balance. It's really very much a challenge for people. Some people don't like thinking equids. And I've put in the effects of punishment here. If you use a consistent level of physical negative reinforcement, that's a lot of pressure, or punishment, you actually shut down thinking and learning. The animal won't offer the behaviors that you want it to. And the best example I can give, if you're using sort of positive things, is that there was a lady who was a trainer, and she taught her equine the horse's choice cue. So what she did was she would go out for rides or she'd go for training, and she would direct it left, right, she would steer, she'd do those things. But sometimes she would just go horse's choice, the reins, and he could go left or right. And that is really important, because she came up to do some logging, and she said, you know, she was really struggling to get the horse to go along the normal right side of the log that she wanted to go to. And he was resisting, and she kind of went, okay, horse's choice. And this horse apparently stepped over the log, went to the left side, stood perfectly, and waited to be hitched and go. So, you know, you are a team when you're working with your equid, allowing them to listen to them, which is the key thing you have to do to that thinking animal. If they say they can't do something, there's probably a reason for it. And listening to that animal and not just trying to get them to do it regardless comes back to trust. It comes back to who we are as a person. And I noticed Caroline here has a question. My Spanish horse is scared. He has a tendency to freeze, so he stands still for minutes, but he is not relaxed at all. How do I teach him to stand still and still be relaxed and able to think? Okay, so bring this back, Caroline, to thinking about shaping behavior and comfort zones. If his natural temperament is to be fearful, to be scared, then perhaps we need to do some work away from the issue. Don't go to the problem to fix the problem. Work with a shaping plan for building trust, confidence, and problem solving, using obstacles, doing things. So we build his natural confidence. We build his ability to solve problems. We build his trust in you. So ultimately what he's saying is, there's something that I'm worried about, but I don't trust that you're going to deal with it in an effective way. So I'm just going to stand here. I'm going to watch it. I can't listen to you. And we've gone past that threshold. So this is not the place to be fixing the behavior. So what we have to do is begin to start further away from the problem. We break the problems down into small steps, and we start finding the edges of his comfort zone in a very controlled way. Things that might worry him, things that could be a balloon at the end of the arena. It could be, I don't know, bunting, whatever you know, you can begin to work with, so that you get him to learn how to solve problems. And you get him to deal with that with you. That's how you build the trust. That's how you build the confidence between you. You know, in that sort of situation, Caroline, I wouldn't be going to do the training on the job, because there's just too much risk, and it's too much that's uncontrollable in the situation. So that's a classic example where you'd want to set up a shaping plan to teach him how to deal with things, but at a level that allows him to be calm and relaxed. Once he's gone past that threshold and he started to get that tense and he can't move, then it's really difficult to bring them down. And just based on the science of behavior, because it's an emotional response. So we need to work at expanding his capacity to be able to deal with things. But if you want to talk more about that, Caroline, and an individual case, I'm more than happy to do that, and we can sort that out. But I just wanted to say, yeah, it's really important. I'm pretty sure you would all do this, but it's that listening to the animal is crucially important. And I think that's maybe where young, inexperienced people who are new to work in equids will make a mistake. They won't have done enough work to have trust in the animal. So when the animal says, no, I can't do that, I'm gonna have a problem. There was a classic example in the eventing world a few years ago. There were 5 or 6 deaths in the UK during the event section of 3-day eventing. And what they discovered was there was a tendency for the horses to be over-drilled. They were controlled. They were told what to do, especially for the show jumping and the dressage, to a point that when they were doing their eventing sections, they got to these big jumps out on the cross country, and they would jump when they were told, as opposed to a horse with more experience that wasn't so drilled, that would be told to jump but would refuse because it was in the wrong place, it wasn't going to make it, and it couldn't make that jump. And so this overtraining and this control, do this, totally relies on a human to get it right every single time. A lot of safety comes from working together and being able to predict the behavior of each other and listening to the animal when they say I can't do something. Which kind of brings me to this final slide of the 18 mule train, because there's actually 18 mules and 2 horses. The wheels at the back were horses. And I'm sure you're all familiar with this, and their tremendous efforts over 10 years of dragging 36 tons of wagon and box boron from Death Valley in Nevada. And if you've ever seen the videos of these, which I'm sure you will have done, but if you haven't, go on YouTube, 20 mule train, showing these animals jumping over the traces at the back to be able to pull in the right direction, and what they are capable of in all the time that they had the mule trains was that they never lost a mule through any sort of accident or injury. And so good preparation, good training is a huge part of what we can do. And I think if you can do it in these situations with this massive weight, then we can probably do it with everything else. Cool. Joao has asked a question there that when working with long reins, we need to trust. To be honest, I can't see much with 900 kilo draft mare in front of me, so I really need trust, criteria of safety, distances, etc. Yeah, no, totally, absolutely. That is exactly what we need to be able to do as well is that trust. And I think, you know, many of you will naturally do that anyway because you've got that level of experience. But it's not something that maybe people coming into work in equids are really thinking about. They're not necessarily thinking about all that sort of thing, which is really important. So yes, questions, long reining, loads of long reining. I think that's missed out often in the training of horses nowadays. Lots of long reining, not lunging, long reining. They used to have a saying that you could wear out a pair of boots on a young horse, just long reining it everywhere over things. And again, that's part of the progression. It's no good having a horse that will follow you on the ground over everything and then you're going to be behind them driving them. You need to teach them with the long reins to deal with the obstacles that you did when they were leading before you then go to the driving work. So there are these phases that we go through. Cool, good. Okay, Joao, that's kind of everything from me. I'm going to open it up to any questions, comments, disagreements, anything that anybody wanted to do or
Thanks,
say.
Ben. Thank you so much for your presentation. Really appreciate that. Yeah, so it's time for questions, time for comments. The group is not that big, so I'll probably suggest that if anyone has a question or a comment, they just unmute the microphone, turn on the camera if they want, and just try to keep the comments or the questions sharp and short so we can all participate. But we are all more than welcome to participate and to ask. I have a few comments around here, but I'll prefer to see if someone will ask first.
Go on, ask one while they're thinking about it as well.
Okay, so just at the beginning of your presentation, you mentioned something that for me you mentioned two aspects that for me are important. The first one was animals need to be physically, mentally grown. And from my experience, donkeys and horses, and let's leave mules for the moment, but donkeys and horses, they have completely different growing ages, let's say like that. Well, of course, we know that even horses, depending on the task, they have different ages, but I'd like you to comment about if it's possible to generalize, and I know it's very difficult, but main difference between horses and donkeys in terms of learning process, including that aging that is important both for physically and mentally.
Yeah, I think first that it can be artificially altered by experience. So you might meet equines that have had a start in life where maybe 6-7 years they haven't had anything done to them. They may have been a feral or wild kind of mustang or brumby or something, and then they come into training, so they're 8-9 years old, but actually they're only a 2-year-old in terms of maybe experience. And so thinking of age of an equine more about experience than physical age is more important to the understanding of what they're capable of. If you have a foal that's well trained and has done all the exercises, it may well behave in a better way than an older animal that hasn't had the same experiences, leaving out the physical abilities, you know, around a 2-year-old or a 4-year-old. My general experience is that we probably traditionally start animals and use them a little bit too young. I think donkeys in particular suffer from this because of their stoic nature, and the lack of the flight signals that they give is that it's very easy to just kind of have a moderately well-trained donkey and drop a saddle on it and start doing things. And I see that a lot with people, and oh, he was fine, it was great. Whereas horses naturally with that flight mechanism make people work a lot harder to get to that point. But I generally think, yeah, probably we should actually maybe not be doing so much riding and working with our horses until they're probably 6, rather than the traditional sort of 4-year-old. I think 4-year-old horses, especially big animals, draft animals, things like that are still growing, and certainly mentally, I don't think are quite ready to do more than very light work and not anything particular.
Especially in animals that can work with us for 25 years, right? So sometimes just trying to run and to rush a little bit at the beginning may ruin the long-term plans. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Thanks, Ben. Any other question or comment? Come on, I think we need, there are questions, but people is shy.
No, I mean, hopefully what we've shared is common sense. There's nothing revolutionary out there. I think formalizing the process of training is important, which people often struggle with a little bit, especially the generalization. I see that a lot, getting your, any aspect of training, from getting your donkey ready for the farrier to taking your horse out for a ride. We don't do enough generalization.
As Tamara is asking something here, how can you deal with cases as the army where the handlers rotate a lot, resulting in inconsistency? That's Tamara's personal experience with the Chilean army mules, I believe.
Yeah, I think there's probably two things. Is you teach the mules deliberately to deal with inconsistency. And so that becomes part of the training. What tends to happen, if you have one owner, one handler, inevitably as humans, we like patterns. So we behave in a certain way. As part of the training of the animal, what we need to be able to do is to deliberately do this generalization. So you train your mule for the army to do a set task, and it's usually trained by one person in one way. The generalization piece is then to say, let's start to do it differently. Let's do it wrong. Let's do it inside out. Let's do the left foot before the right foot. Let's go and do this. Let's do it slowly. Let's do it fast. So you deliberately build the inconsistency into the training program and experience of that animal, so that it begins to go, okay, whatever way you pick up my foot, I understand that you want me to pick up my foot. Because quite frankly, it's almost impossible to train every handler to do it in exactly the right way. As hard as you might try or regulate, really difficult to get everybody to do it the same way. So sometimes it's just easier to train the animal to deal with inconsistency than it is for training people to be consistent. I mean, have a training program, have a shaping plan, do the training to try and get people as close as they can to it. But if you train that young mule a much younger and train the inconsistencies in so they'll deal with it, it becomes not a problem for them. I can see here, Jan has asked, my horse pulled carts and wagons in Saskatchewan. I can never say that. Canada. But has come to Indiana where our environment characteristics are much different. Do we start over? No, you probably don't need to start over. You need to start back a little bit. So you think about that generalization phase. If you've done lots of work, if the animal has a lot of experience, the mistake one could make is go, oh, well, he's done it, and then we just go and do the same level. Just actually do a little bit of training, do some long reining, do some stuff that is probably really easy. Do some exposure to that environment where it can succeed. Make it really easy for them to succeed, and then build that back up. So you don't have to go all the way back to the start of training, but what you probably would do is just make it a lot simpler and just give them some exposure, because you need to be able to predict how they're going to behave. And again, example, I guess a riding example makes it easier to understand, but people have their horses and they go riding all summer. If you live in the UK, you probably don't do much riding in the winter. It's a bit wet, it's a bit damp, it's cold. So the animal goes back in the field. And then in the spring, you think, oh, let's do some riding. It's a nice day. And you get the animal out and you go for a ride. And all of a sudden, you just stretch its comfort zones all the way out. Rather than going, okay, we haven't ridden for 3 months properly and it's all changed. Let's just go for a walk today with our horse in hand. Or maybe let's do some long reining. Or let's just remind them we're doing some obstacle work. And when you're then comfortable, they're familiar, then you go out and do more. So yeah, it's a great question. Just do a little bit of some of the things that they can easily succeed of. Reassure yourself that everything's the same. And by the time, if you moved again and again, by that time you've done 3 or 4 environments, you could just, they generalize, they go, well, wherever I am, that's fine. I hope that makes sense.
Ben, David from Galicia just wrote here, he said, I have two problems now with my 5-year-old Breton. Noisy machines and the ability for the animal to stay calm standing.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the two problems he's facing. Noisy machines, overreaction to noisy machines, and the ability to stand still.
Okay, so again, what you start to look at is maybe there's a trait there. If you've got behavior, as humans, we tend to look at these things in isolation. Working with the science of behavior, you can begin to see maybe there's a temperament thing there about how calm animal is. If he can't stay calm when standing still and patient, then it's going to be really difficult with the noisy machines. So you have to look at which one you might start working with first. And you might, in this case, not train them both alongside. You might just work with the standing still and the being calm. Again, having a deliberate shaping program where you, and again, begin to expose them to obstacles and doing things. I've got an advanced shaping plan on my website that's about, you start to use, approximations, lawn mowers and leaf blowers and strimmers and chainsaws and all those sorts of things in your training program. But you don't start next to the animal, you start 100 meters away and you gradually build them up closer and closer. So you can begin to think about that. Now it depends on where your threshold is for your horse. If you're clipping a horse and it's nervous of the clippers, then you might start with an electric toothbrush that just has a small vibration and a small amount of noise. So if you're talking about noisy machinery, trying to find approximations or smaller amounts of noise that you can control. So, is there the opportunity to be able to record the sound of noisy machinery and then use that with the animal where you can turn it down and build it up? Is there a way of being able to watch some noisy machinery but from further away and using positive reinforcement to counter conditions, so to give the animal a good experience while they're seeing that noisy machinery? So this is all about shaping, and it's about stretching those comfort zones. We can have more of a chat about it and look at the specifics of it, but in general, that's the process that you begin to do. How can I break it down? How can I make it smaller? How can I reward the right behavior? So, rewarding the things you do want. That's how you set boundaries. And so the process is the same. That's the great thing about the science of behavior. There's only so many ways to do something, but if you can grasp shaping, stretch the comfort zones, reward the right behaviors, you can find a way through it. But it requires that imagination to say, how do I break this down? How do I make this easier? It's very difficult to find quieter machinery. So doing it from further away, giving that exposure, is probably a place to start and gradually building that up. Let me say here, we've got a couple of questions flooding in there.
Two questions, yeah. One from Caroline and the other one from Claudia.
Before that, I've got one from Jan. Jan says, sometimes I'm afraid to go for a walk because I'm afraid they will get scared and run off and I won't be able to stop them with the lead rope. And thing to practice, anything to help with this. He's a light drive. Yeah, so okay, the first thing I would say is don't go for a walk, because if you're afraid that they might run off, what that says is that you don't trust them, which tells me you haven't done enough work in a safe environment to be able to predict their behavior. So again, we're back to the shaping plan, and there is one on my website. If you don't want to write your own, breaking it down to small steps. So starting in a safe environment, doing your leading over things, round things, noisy things, things that move, bags that are tied to the fence, generalizing that to different areas of a property or whatever you have available to train within, so that you begin to get to a point where you're like, okay, we can deal with all this stuff. Now we want to go for a walk, but I'm only going to literally go 10 meters and I'm going to come back. I'm going to go 20 meters and I'm going to come back. That's enough for today. And you build up in this way of shaping to go, I'm going to go 20 meters, 50 meters, 100 meters. And as you build that experience and you build that confidence, then you can predict their behavior more, and then you stay safer. But if you are ever in a situation where you're going, I'm not sure, should I, maybe, I think it'll be okay, then you probably shouldn't, because that tells me that you haven't done enough of shaping or training to be able to purely predict their behavior. Now, the horse world is great at going, don't be silly, get on with it, don't let them get away with it, you've got to make them do this, and other ridiculous things that get said. this is about you and the horse, the combination of the two. So make sure that if you're feeling nervous, they're going to pick up on it, and for sure there's going to be a train wreck. And so you don't want to do that. Come back to training. Don't go to the problem to solve the problem, and begin to work in a safe environment so you can build it up and enjoy that journey. Caroline says, what do we think about giving treats to reward the right behavior? I think it's absolutely perfect. No problem at all with giving treats. Treats do not cause equines to bite. It's the timing of the treat or the reward that causes equines to bite. So really important to ensure that if you're going to give a reward, then you give it at the right moment. The mistake that people make is to give the reward or the treat for something that isn't very specific, the animal doesn't understand. So they nudge them, people give them a treat, they've learned that nudging works. Then when the reward isn't there, they start to nudge harder. People go, oh my goodness, he's getting a bit, and they give him a food, and then he learns to do it that way. So, you know, I use food rewards all the time. There's not an issue with them. They can be very powerfully motivating. The only thing I would say with food rewards is that they tend to warm the animal up a bit. So if you're looking for a more energetic behavior like leading or walking or those sorts of things, then food rewards will give you more energy. If you want a calmer behavior like standing still or being patient, wither scratches are the key. Use wither scratches, hard wither scratches, 4 or 5 seconds, scratching hard enough while your animal's going, oh, like that. That lowers heart rate and produces a calmer response. So if you're looking, coming back to David saying, you know, my horse standing still, are we using the right types of rewards? Reward with those scratches so that we can get that behavior really marked in a calm way that will come down.
There's one question from Claudia.
Yeah, okay. So talking about donkeys, gender, is there a distinction in temperament, male or female? Which to choose? I think, yeah, there are definite differences. You know, the ancestry of the donkey is such that they are more territorial, and males tend to play fight more. They tend to play with toys more, in my experience, and they tend to, around the years as of 2 years old, be a little bit more challenging in their behavior as they grow into themselves, especially if they haven't been well trained earlier on. Females, you know, there are no hard and fast rules. Every year we do get donkeys, quite a few actually, who have attacked small stock, goats, chickens, other animals, and they could be male or female. They tend to more often than not be male, but they can be female as well. And the downside with females is obviously they come into season every 18 to 21 days. And for some females, that's not an issue. For some jennies, for other jennies, it's a real issue. So I think the short answer is it depends what you want them for, and how much training you're going to put in. But probably females are a little easier to work with in the majority of cases.
Or geldings. That's a good option, right?
Yeah. If they're gelded early enough. Yeah, the mistake that a lot of donkey owners make is that they leave their donkey as a stallion until they're 2-3 years old and then have them gelded. But if they're gelded at a normal time, then yeah, that often is the best of both worlds. Jan is just saying here in a message, my horse is not afraid of a lot of machines, but is afraid of sudden loud noise coming behind him at a far distance. I think it's related to what he can't see. How do you desensitize or shape for specific problems? Again, it's this imagination, Jan, of being able to break things down. It's being, okay, what are the elements of that? Is it about noise? Is it about movement? Is it about sight? Is he naturally just afraid of things behind him? You know, if you back him over a pole, is that an issue? If you walk behind him carrying a balloon, is that an issue when he can see? Some horses naturally are worried about things behind them. So is it that you can work in a smaller, easier way? Is it that you begin to do some training, like, just for instance, as I mentioned, balloons? You know, you can get little rocket balloons that you blow up with a tube and you let them go and they kind of go, whee! you can start opposite ends of the arena, and you can blow them up a little bit and have someone just let them go, have him face them, then gradually turn away, you know, on the side and then behind, and let those things grow and blow them bigger and more, and make more and more noise and more movement, and you build up, reinforcing all the good behavior. I think this is the challenge for most people. It's the imagination to say, how do I approximate the problem? We tend to, as humans, want to go, well, in this case, you know, I've got to replicate something half a mile away that's making sudden loud noises to be able to solve the problem. You don't. You just need to do enough of the general training for them to give you a window of opportunity when there is something that is a quarter of a mile away and loud, to go, oh, it's a bit worrying, but it's not that worrying because I've already done some training, and they relax a little bit. You give them a scratch and then you go, okay, well, that's fine. So, you know, people often say to me, my horse is scared of tractors, but I don't have a tractor, so I can't get it ready for that. You can, because the elements of tractor are about noise, about space, about smell. So you start to look at what's around you in terms of, we can replicate those elements, make sure your horse isn't claustrophobic in small spaces. Things coming towards them. Oh, he's fine walking around the cars, but in the road and the cars coming towards him, you know, practice those things at a difference. Get him used to the chainsaw being started up, whatever it might be. It's putting enough in. That's the only secret to horsemanship and safety, is just doing enough of the work, and being able to predict what's going to happen. If you can control the environment, you've got enough experience, you can do a lot of that with the animal as it's going on. If you haven't, then a lot of it has to be done specifically setting out a program of training that will solve that issue for you, really.
Working on consistency, right, Ben?
Yeah, absolutely. And the key to this is it's about relationship. Everyone wants a relationship, but the relationship isn't formed in perfect times. It's formed when you're trying to solve the problem of the horse that spooks because there's a sound a quarter of a mile away. That's where we actually learn and work through the problems and figure things out, and are there for the animal and there for us. Then we get a better relationship. We shouldn't shy away from those things or worry about them. It's definitely about being able to enjoy that journey, which I think we've lost a little bit of the art of doing quite often. You know, we're trying to get to a goal or do something, and that does worry me about the sort of where working equids are going, especially in certain parts of the world. That a lot of people taking it on, but without the natural common sense that's required around equines, and that preparedness to just take the time it takes to do the work and enjoy it.
Yep. So I think, is there any other question, a final question or a final comment for Ben?
Bom, tá me ouvindo?
Yes, Ali.
I have a question for him. It's about education. How we can train young people to do this? Because, you know, some people working have more bicycles and cars and trucks and tractors, but we still need working animals. And how you can invite these people to learn things like that. I think this is very important for any different country.
I think Ali just gave us the subject for the next webinar.
I absolutely think that. There you go. Yeah, that is a whole webinar.
So sorry.
No, I don't. Sorry, I think it's so true. It's so true. You know, how do you put in this experience and encourage people to, and also stop that crossover between a generation now that are used to just turning the key and starting something or having it instantly, and then I'm sitting here saying, but it could take, you know, 4 or 5 years to train your equine to be of the level that you want it to be, and you can't just switch that on. I guess you could go and buy it, but even then, you know, that animal doesn't know you and probably isn't going to behave in the same way as it did when it was with its previous owner or trainer. So absolutely, there's a real issue about making this, and that's where the human behavior change element comes in terms of how we motivate people and how we get understanding what motivates them, I think, really. So there's no short answer to it other than making it available.
Yeah, and I think that's a little bit the work that FECTU throughout all the members. You know, it's dissemination, information, training courses, workshops, these kind of webinars. It's been this a very important line. And how to, because it's relatively easy to attract young people to this kind of events. But then when you see the amount of those young people who actually became professionals or make a living out of the working equids, it's a very small percentage, you know. So sometimes it happens with us in Portugal. You feel that you have a tourism of formation. People attend the workshop because it's in the countryside with animals, trying something new. But the amount of people that actually will become professional, if we just take only that factor into account, probably our training program is a complete failure, because the percentage of people becoming professionals is really small. But then you have all the informative part that is so important, and that's why we continue to organize these events.
I do think, you know, the key is a little bit focusing on the difference between getting people to focus on the outcome. I think a lot of young people, you know, they look at the outcome. How can I get that animal to behave and do what it's supposed to do? Because that's what you get the ethos, the ego for doing. So you control it, you use force, you make it do stuff. As opposed to, how do you reward young people and the communities and show them that actually the way in which they work, the relationship that they create, is the truer measure of the horsemanship or the skill that that person has. And I've always noticed that when I've been traveling, is trying to change that from an outcome driven, I can control my animal, I can make it do stuff, aren't I amazing, to actually I'm working with my animal, and that takes a lot more skill.
Yeah, that's true.
Ben, this is Pitt. Maybe you can say a few words about blinkers. Because
in what respect, Pitt?
Just say a few words about it. You're better.
Okay. I can imagine the sort of question. For me, I think I don't see the necessity for blinkers if you do the training. You know, they are traditional, and you know, they help prevent the animals see lots of things, but the animals are smart. They know that noise, they know all those things. I've worked with lots of equines over the world who don't have blinkers, and they work very well, and it requires a little bit more training. I think, you know, the blinkers help with holding an animal in and maybe desensitizing things to them. But given the equine sight, which has such a panoramic view and so little really good depth focus, I think that it must be quite hard for an equine to adjust to just wearing blinkers for work. And so for me, yeah, I wouldn't say never, but I think we just do the work. That means you don't have to have blinkers as much as possible.
The problem is that in some countries they are compulsory if you drive on roads.
Yep, and your bit's the same and all sorts of things, and it just shows the how slow and our additional sort of attitude to horses. You know, you have to have a whip to make it safe. You know, you have to have blinkers to make it safe. You have to have a bit to make it safe, you know, which is something, you know, from the cavalry 50, 100, 200 years ago. And we haven't managed to move it forward yet. And we still have a culture, certainly in the UK, of, you know, controlling the animal by bigger pieces of equipment and more force rather than more training and more understanding and more common sense.
Yeah. Okay. Ben, thank you so much for your time. It's been a wonderful webinar. I think we all learn a lot, and it's incredible to see how small differences and the way people train the animals, the way people engage with animals, and spending time with the animals is never time that is wasted, because there will be a reward at the end. So thank you so much for sharing all your knowledge.